Welcome back to the channel. It's been about 5 days since we last uploaded a video. Today, we've got to talk about Pochettino. We've got to talk about incoming transfers to Chelsea Football Club because, all right, we've signed Nkunku, we've signed Nicholas Jackson. It just feels like it's gone a little bit quiet and we're looking at where else players might be coming into Chelsea. Obviously, Moises Caicedo is on the horizon. We're pretty confident that that could happen, but there's still a but hanging over that deal. It's not been finalised yet. We're not sure if personal terms are fully agreed. We're hearing they're around 90%. And it's just nearing completion. That's all we're hearing. The deal may be able to happen quickly. It's not going to be, hopefully, a long, dragged-out process. But Chelsea Football Club have been managing to offload players. And it looks like, going into July, we may have balanced the books from last year's financial fair play, and we will have the spending ability and the financial superpowers of Clearlake Capital to back us in the transfer market to sign top players and acquire the very best players in the positions that Chelsea need it the most. But, and there is a but to this, Mauricio Pochettino is well regarded by the board. They trust him. They back him as a manager because they've given him a good contract. They've decided that he is the right man to take Chelsea forward after making the mistake with Graham Potter. The problem is they are allowing him to potentially have his input on transfers that may be joining the club and players that are going to be staying. Now, don't get me wrong, that sounds like the right idea. It's an old school approach. It's not too common anymore. But under the likes of Ferguson and Arsene Wenger in the past, managers were in control of the players that were coming in and the players that were leaving their squads. Now, there are teams in charge to recruit players to the club as assets, and the manager is given a squad of players and told to get the best out of that squad. They don't normally have too much control in the transfer ingoings and outgoings. That's just not a thing anymore because these big businesses have decided to employ people who are specialists in recruitment, people to identify what the club needs most, because if managers change, the assets will likely remain and what players will fit for different assets and the direction that the club is going in. So now we're starting to include Pochettino in the discussion, and this is what worries me because last summer, before stuff was in place, Thomas Tuchel was allowed to make decisions regarding transfers. And we saw, arguably, as much as I love Thomas Tuchel, a horrific influx of players. Egotistical, high-waged, failing to deliver players. Cucurella, Koulibaly, Raheem Sterling, Wesley Fofana hasn't really hit the ground running. Okay, he's probably been the best of a bad bunch, I would say, and that isn't a very high standard at all. Now, already, players who were brought in under Thomas Tuchel last year are starting to depart Chelsea Football Club. We've seen Koulibaly move on. We've seen other Thomas Tuchel recruits from his previous year starting to move on. Now, if Pochettino is allowed to do the same, we may have an even bigger problem on our hand. Because I'm not sure that Pochettino's previous recruitments and previous strategies regarding transfers and the evidence at his previous clubs is something to be admired. Poch's talent ID leaves a lot to be desired. Mauricio Pochettino has already apparently spoken about keeping Kepa at the club to potentially be number one. We've been linked with Lautaro Martinez, Frank Kessie, and Gabby Veiga. These are four players that don't scream and add excitement for me if they're in Chelsea's squad next season. The first one I want to start with is Kepa. Chelsea fans, we all know that Kepa in goal is what is prohibiting us from potentially moving back up the table. Now, don't get me wrong. There are stats when you look at Kepa. They are there and they look good. There are percentage save stats. There are distribution stats that can look okay. It's when you look a bit deeper into those stats and you realise where they come from and what they are, and you actually do an eye test on the guy, that you realise that Kepa is not a top keeper. Kepa will never be at a team that is considered a top team. A team challenging for Premier League titles, league titles, Champions Leagues, trophies at the end of the day. And look, Kepa's got a really, really good trophy cabinet. But don't forget, this guy cost 70 million quite a while ago, and he really hasn't delivered. He's consistently made mistakes. He's been good for Chelsea in spells, but he just isn't the answer moving forward. And there are, albeit a limited number, better keepers available on the market at reasonable prices right now. And if Pochettino thinks that he can make Kepa an okay keeper and the player to go forward to as our number one next season, then I'm concerned. Because he thought that Lloris was good enough. And don't get me wrong, Lloris is a World Cup winning goalkeeper. But let's be honest, full of mistakes and actually not as good as probably what his trophy haul suggests he is. And that concerns me that Mauricio Pochettino might think that that's the level. Let's move on to a couple of the other players because we know Kepa well. Lautaro Martinez, a well-known player, a player who has recently won the World Cup, a player who appeared in the Champions League final for Inter Milan, but a player whose goal conversion rate this season was 16%. Now, just to give you an idea, after looking at a few top strikers around the world, you might be looking at between 21 to 23, 24% of a good to world-class level striker. He is down at 16. He's been better before, but he is currently at 16% off of last season. He's not amazing. He is not a clinical goal scorer by any means. And look, the problem Chelsea have had in recent years is that we haven't had a clinical goal scorer. To be honest, we haven't had a goal scorer out and out, and we haven't had someone that's been able to put the chances away. The one thing that I think Lautaro would bring to Chelsea is his determination, his fight, his desire to win a football match. That's something Chelsea have lacked in recent years as well, and I think he has that in abundance. There is a sort of reminiscence of Carlos Tevez about the player. He has what I would say the dog in him. He is willing to fight to earn victory. And I like that, and I think that's probably what Pochettino likes. And that's arguably a trait that a lot of Argentinian players in the past have had. They win at all costs, whether that's by determination, hard work, fighting, cheating. That is something that Argentinian players are renowned for. Hence why they've just won the World Cup again. Now, my worry with him, like I said, is clinical goal-scoring ability. It's just not there with Lautaro. You will constantly need another striker. I would class him as a second striker, much like I would have classed Kai Havertz as well. These are players that need someone else to mainly occupy the rest of the defence to be successful in what they do. Hence why, when Inter Milan last won the league, Lukaku did that job, and Lautaro was being picked up unmarked and just scoring goals when the defence's mind wasn't on him. It was being occupied by a big physical presence in Lukaku. Now, my worry is that obviously that's possible. We've just signed a big physical guy in Nicholas Jackson, and you could imagine that Nkunku and Lautaro playing off of a guy like that, it could work. However, Pochettino likes to only play with one striker if you look at his track record. So all of a sudden you start thinking, would he really back Lautaro to be an out-and-out striker at Chelsea? It kind of concerns me. It worries me. I'm not sure he's the answer on his own. So apparently Pochettino's watched him a lot. But that's another player that we have to look at and go, is Poch on it with his talent ID? Now, let's look at Tottenham Hotspur, because when Pochettino was at Spurs, he signed 27 players. That's right, 27 players for Tottenham Hotspur. A lot of that was from probably leftovers and remains from the Gareth Bale money. probably money that Tottenham had available before they started building the new stadium and money they were willing to spend to get them through that transition. And if you look at Tottenham's team and the players that he signed, well, I'll read off a couple of names and actually a few names. And to be quite honest with you, these players, I mean, you make of this list what you will, but 27 players arrived at Spurs during Mauricio Pochettino's reign. Some of the names and arrivals of big fee players were Ndombele, Fazio, Janssen, Stambouli, Osvaldo at Southampton is one I've got on this list as well. Wanyama, Ng, Gazaniga, an interesting one. He actually signed him because he's from the same town. If you look into the details of that, it's very dodgy. And the guy's had a whole professional career out of it. Wimmer, Foyth, Yedlin, and Kudu. It's quite scary, the amount of players that were bought in for Pochettino at Tottenham and Southampton who didn't perform. And that isn't all of them. If you go through the list, you can just Google it. It's quite scary, and it does make me concerned. When you start seeing players like Frank Kessie on the list as well, who every time I've ever watched him looks clumsy. He's not quite cut it at Barcelona. I just don't see what a player like that would add to Chelsea, and apparently Poch likes him too. The other one is Vega. He looks okay. He's had a good season. I've watched a little bit of him at the Under-21 European Championship, albeit he hasn't had loads of game time. He looks okay. He looks okay. There's nothing screaming excitement. I'm honest with you, he's probably a slightly more technical Conor Gallagher. He looks like he'll run, he'll work. He's got better stats than Conor Gallagher does. But he isn't Chelsea, he isn't homegrown, and that's what Conor has. And I like that with Con, that if you bring him on, you know what you're getting from him. He wants to play for the shirt. And believe me, with all the common players departing, we need to keep some of them around. We really do. What I do want to say is, Pochettino doesn't always get it wrong, because he's also been there when Dele Alli come in, Eric Dyer, Son, Alderweireld, Lucas Moura, even Ramos at PSG. He's been there and recruited some excellent players who are only just leaving Tottenham now, are full internationals, or are still at Tottenham and key members of the squad, or have gone on to have fantastic careers elsewhere. So Poch has got an eye. He also likes an Argentinian connection. If you look through the list, there is a lot of Argentinian names. And with Enzo being one of the prime players at Chelsea Football Club to go forward with this new generation at Chelsea, the Argentinian link isn't the worst. Because obviously if Enzo is in the heart of that team, he's through the spine, you can see that Argentinian players joining Chelsea wouldn't be the end of the world. So there are good and bad things to this. What I do want to say regarding recruitment at Chelsea Football Club is maybe we take in some of Poch's ideas and then they are assessed by Whit Stanley, Vivell, whoever else is in charge in that area looking at players to recruit for Chelsea Football Club. Because, arguably, since they came in, the players that they've recruited have been far better than what we saw in the summer under Tuchel and what we're seeing being suggested around Pochettino's name and who he likes. So, obviously, Poch isn't in through the door yet. He's going to have lined up players whilst he's been out of work. He's going to be in scouting, looking around, watching and assessing players. Would they fit his system at his next club? Probably didn't know where that was, but knew the style of football he'd play. So he knows enough that they may fit. But he's been questionable in the past. So look, let's try and leave it to the recruitment team because, arguably, since they've been in charge and in control of the recruitment at Chelsea Football Club, the players that have arrived have actually performed. Madueke, Badashile are probably the ones, Enzo, that you'd say are of a higher level than what Chelsea have brought in recently. Mudryk is questionable, but I do believe there's potential there. And if that can be turned into consistent ability, we've got a top player on our hands. So, going forward, let's hope Pochettino kind of stays out of the mix with recruitment unless he really believes that player's essential and knows he will turn into a Dele Alli, Lucas Moura, Eric Dyer, Alderweireld type of player. that sort of level that you need to be in and around the top 4 of the Premier League and in and around the top European competition finals. So that's where we are. Leave it to the recruitment team. Let's see what happens. Hopefully, July is an exciting month for Chelsea Football Club regarding ingoings, because this one, June, has been super exciting for outgoings. Chelsea fans, remember to subscribe, like the video, and I'll catch you in the next one.